Hello, hello, hello. This is Warren Redlick. I am doing something different today. I'm doing a Twitter space, but I'm also recording this, and I will probably put this space up on YouTube or on Locals or on my Patreon account. Or we have this, banking crisis that we just had with Silicon Valley Bank. It's a mess, and people are responding with all sorts of answers. I think the most popular ones I see are blame Trump or blame Biden or the Federal Reserve is doing something wrong. And I think I was in a space yesterday with Yaman Tastivar, his Tesla triple space, and he was talking about it, and others were talking about it, and I brought up this question: Is there a fundamental problem with our banking system that we don't want to face? People just want to believe in the system we have, and it's hard to accept maybe the system we have is broken. And I think the banking system is broken. I think the banking system was always fundamentally unreliable. And all the changes that have happened over the last, I'm going to say 100 plus years, have only made it less reliable in a way. We have this appearance of the Federal Reserve stepped in and we have this appearance that the Federal Reserve stepped in and solved the problem. But thank you for Brian Wang for joining. I asked a few people to come and speak, and Bradford I don't think can speak. So if you go back to sort of like the basics, there's this concept called fractional reserve banking, which is one of the fundamental underlying problems. It's that you put your money in the bank doesn't hold your money and just hold it for you. The bank lends it out. And so if you lend out, if you put in $100, the bank may lend out $96. And so when you go back for your money, if they have 1,000 depositors and you go back for your money, well, 1,000 people put, $100 in. Well, now you got $100,000 there. You go back for your $100 because 1,000 people put it in. They've got $100,000 in there. They've lent out 96,000. They've still got 4,000 left, so they can give you $1,000. But if 10 people come and ask for their money back, then that may be a problem. Maybe that's 400. 4 people come back is 400. If enough people come back and look for their money, the bank doesn't have all the cash in there because they did this thing called fractional reserve banking. And so that's a fundamental underlying problem. And, banking serves a valuable role. People want a place they can store their money. They would like to earn interest on their money. People want to borrow money to be able to finance things like buying a house or starting a business. So having banks being sort of intermediary between people who want to save money and people who want to borrow money makes a little bit of sense, but it has a fundamental flaw. And what's happened over the last 100 years is a bunch of steps, and there were banking crises before all the changes, because it's a fundamentally unstable system. And the idea was the federal government steps in or state governments step in and they regulate the banks to make sure they're doing their jobs right. Or at least that's what they tell us. And then the Federal Reserve comes in and we sort of have this concept today where the Federal Reserve, this is a big change, okay? We just had this big change, this program called, I don't know if it's BTSP or BFTP or whatever this new program is. I think it's BFTP or BTFP. This new program from the Federal Reserve stops depositors in all banks, seemingly all banks all the time. If you go back before this moment, and probably before 2008, the principle was that you could put up to a certain amount in your bank currently, and the FDIC would insure your deposits. There was this entity called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and they would charge a premium to the banks, and they would basically guarantee for depositors, as of recently, up to $250,000 of your deposits are guaranteed. The FDIC will step in and pay it. Now, did the FDIC really have enough money to guarantee all that? Maybe, maybe not. And that sort of reassures you in a bank run as long as most people don't have more than $250,000 in their bank account. But, for most of us, a $250,000 limit sounds great. But for a, business, maybe a $250,000 limit is enough. You can play games and you can have multiple $250,000 accounts in multiple banks if you need to, but you still sort of run into problems where some entities need to have more than $250,000 in an account, and then they don't feel backstopped. And the Federal Reserve just did something I think people think, oh, they just did the right thing. Okay, well, the Federal Reserve just basically stepped up and said, we're going to basically backstop all deposits. And it's not quite that simple, and there's some question about how extensive their backstop is. But you have to take a step back and say, well, why didn't we do this before? You know, we have this FDIC that was created. Why didn't the FDIC just guarantee all deposits from the beginning? And the answer is because, you know, where it's coming from, and we've created this world now where the Federal Reserve can just print money. They can just make money and cover anything. And all of this, what we've done is we've taken was an individual risk on one bank. Depositors might worry that bank might not have enough. We allowed fractional reserve banking to say there's an upside to fractional reserve banking. It means a lot more capital is available for people to borrow, to buy houses or start businesses and run their businesses, and they can access credit, and it creates a much easier credit system. It effectively increases the amount of money that's available in an economy, which gives you the sense that it juices the economy, right? It makes the economy run better. At least that's the story we're told. If you go back before the Federal Reserve was created, the United States, you know, fractional reserve banking was limited. We had some banking crises, we had some recessions and, you know, problems. But despite those issues, the United States economy grew very fast over the first 100+ years of its existence. And then criticism, there's two major criticisms I have for the system we have today. I mean, three criticisms. I'll probably end up with more than three. The first one is it's incredibly complicated and very few of us understand it. I don't claim to fully understand the system we have. I think a lot of people who claim to fully understand the system we have don't fully understand the system we have. So it's complicated. And this is just my view of government in general is government told that government is going to make things safer, and then we get a whole bunch of regulations, we get a whole bunch of rules, and we get a whole bunch of other stuff going on and programs. And I'm not convinced it makes us safer. It does make life more complicated. So government's going to make us safe from bad barbers. So now we have barber licensing. Does that really make us safe from bad barbers? No, but it makes it a lot harder to become a barber, and it makes it harder to find a barber. And you go through all these different professions, and it's harder. So in so many different ways, government has made our life, you know, you need to get a license to have a dog. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't know. Zoning regulations are incredibly complicated. So when you get into the banking sector, we have this incredibly complicated banking regulatory system that I don't claim to understand. But so that's one problem. Second problem is we take what's a risk at bank. And when there's a risk of a run at one bank, it does lead to the potential that people are going to fear their other banks, that it might lead to a run. What is that? But there's this issue with you basically have a concern at one bank that this one bank might be a problem. And if you have a world where people understand that each individual bank is at risk, then people don't trust the banks as much. And maybe that's a good thing. And then people don't put as much of their capital into the banks. And then there's less risk on an individual level because people aren't trusting the banks so much. When you have a system where the government keeps telling you the banks are safe, the media tells you the banks are safe, the banking industry tells you the banks are safe, the regulatory bodies tell you the banks are safe, people start to trust the banks more. And then, so now, well, we can't afford to have a bank fail because that might create a run on other banks, and it might create problems for all these businesses that need to make payroll. So all of a sudden, we're backstopping this bank and that bank and this other bank. And what people don't see, this is where I'm getting to, like, what I think is probably the biggest problem is systemic risk. We have been playing a game for the last I want to say 15 years, since maybe 20 plus years, but certainly since the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, 2009, where the Federal Reserve and the federal government, the Federal Reserve just sort of stepped up and started doing way too much, in my opinion. I mean, they were already doing too much before, but now it's just way too much. And when you take these random individual banks and you say, well, we're going to backstop this and we're going to backstop that, at some point you face another problem, which is, well, if this was so simple, then why didn't we do this from the very beginning? And the answer is because there's systemic risk that you may end up with a total collapse of the economy. And I don't know, I'm not claiming I understand how it happens. I think there's a lot of risks that we're facing in today's world. Oh, Brian, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I have a couple of unique views on this. One is I'm from Canada. Originally, I had a job in an insurance company. One of my early career jobs, an insurance company. That insurance company went out of business. Okay, so one thing is Canada banking system. Perfectly fine banking system. People don't, may even not see on the surface differences between it and the United States system. But Canada has not had banking crisis in the last 100 years. It's because they manage it in a more conservative way, where they have kept far more of the basic part of the banking system, putting in deposits, making loans from it, getting a difference from that there, and then separating out all of the hedge fundy, risky stuff, which was what happened with the problem for 2008. That was not the problem this time. It was because of that. So every 10 years, every 15 years, the U.S. has a banking crisis, saving and loans in the 80s, blah, blah, blah. And they don't fix it. But there are other countries like Canada that do not have this and our system can blow up in any moment kind of thing, right? Because they have it run in a more conservative way. One of the things that Canada has is they only let the banks give 5 and 7, maybe 7-year mortgages, and don't have 30-year fixed mortgages. The thing that blew up Silicon Valley Bank was that they had these 10-year instruments, 15, 20-year, 30-year instruments. So like my 30-year mortgage, 3%. If a bank was forced to sell that because of a run of deposits, they would get half their money, right?
Let me pause.
Sure.
Let me pause you on that and explain that to everybody. So, it's not just Silicon Valley Bank. A lot of banks are holding long-term debt that they bought bonds from the federal government. They issued more, and the rates were low at the time they bought the bonds or issued the mortgages. And these are long-term things that are 5, 10, 30 years long. And then the Federal Reserve over the last year and a half or so, I don't even know when it started, raised interest rates. And one of the consequences of raising interest rates is that existing bonds and existing mortgages that are at low rates lose value. They become less valuable because they're paying less interest than something I can buy today. So, and Silicon Valley Bank is hardly the only one in this situation. There's lots of banks and lots of situations where entities are holding this long-term debt that has lost value. And if somebody comes back and says, "Hey, I want my money," they don't have it. It's invested in something that's lost value. So Brian, before you come back, I have one other point, and this may relate to the Canadian banking system. So, there's this systemic risk problem. And I think that Canada may be safer, but not safe. But we'll come to that later. But and Meta, I'm not going to take speakers right now. Then the third problem is that one of the things that you end up having is you end up with a massive concentration of power. Right, so there's this massive concentration of power in the Federal Reserve. There's this massive concentration of power in the federal government. There's this massive concentration of power in large banks, even smaller banks. Silicon Bank was a large bank, but not super large. There's this massive concentration of power in the banking regulators, and what I see, and I've heard this, and I don't fully understand it, is the system we have essentially funnels money to those who are insiders in the system. And so you see bankers, these top bankers get extremely wealthy. And somebody works at the Federal Reserve or works in the government, and then they get a job with a bank, and they get paid. And there's this system where all these people are making tons of money. And what I want to get to, is because of technology, we now have alternatives. Like, it may be that the banking system was necessary in the past because there was no good system for people who had saved money to be able to directly lend it to people. I mean, there were like, community organizations, and people formed communities, and there was some way of doing it, but banks formalized the system and made a system work and they serve other functions, checks and letters of credit and other things. But we didn't have the technology then, that when this system was created, that we have today. And there's two different types of technologies, I'm going to say, that we have today that are probably a better alternative to the system we're using now. Cryptocurrencies is one, and I don't claim to fully understand cryptocurrencies, but I think things like smart contracts, I think we could develop a system that effectively replaces banking and replaces government control of currency, which is a big problem too. What we're seeing is the Federal Reserve prints money, plays games with the currency, controls the money supply. That's fundamentally destabilizing an economy, and we've seen in the past, when you look back in history, and you see governments that borrow, that spend more than they take in. They borrow money and they print money, or a term that people use is they debase the currency. They take gold coins that were 24 karat, them 20 karat, and they say they're the same value. And if you are holding cash, and the federal government the Fed allows interest rates to reach 5% or 8%, well, the cash that you're holding is losing value every year. And so people who are aware of that buy assets, and the assets increase in value, and you see asset price inflation. And the suckers who aren't holding assets see their cash lose value. So there's a whole host of problems with the system we have. And cryptocurrencies, sort of define this is what inflation is going to be. That's the way that they're built. So that's one. Another alternative, like for some of the things that we do, is just we have these technological systems now of technological now where we can do sort of micro lending. You can somebody can say they want a loan. You can have technology systems in place today where we don't really use these that much because of the banking system, but you could see where, well, I want to invest in somebody who wants to borrow money, and you can sort of use the technology to correct people who are trying to save money with people who are trying to borrow money, and do those connections on a smaller scale, sort of like crowdfunding. You can think of crowd lending instead of crowdfunding. I think there are alternatives to the system that are fundamentally more stable and fundamentally prevent the concentration of power, because you end up with cryptocurrencies tend to be decentralized, or ideally are decentralized. Crowdfunding and crowd lending would be decentralized, and that takes away power from the center, and it takes away the ability to do these other things, and it takes away systemic risk. I think people really aren't wrapping their heads around, we handled this one. The last one wasn't so great, but we sort of handled it. We don't know when we're going to get to the point where we're going to have a crisis that blows up, and it doesn't get handled. It so happened that this crisis happened kind of on a Thursday and Friday, and the government had the weekend, the Fed and the government had the weekend to sort of like reassure everybody. If it happened on a Tuesday, would they react fast enough? Would the bank run have started on other banks? This is tricky. So I think that these are things that people need to think about. And I'm going to take other speakers for now, but for now, I just want to go with Brian and Bradford. Bradford, you've heard me ranting for a while. Are you free to speak? I don't know. Bradford wasn't sure he could speak, so I'll go with Brian, and Bradford, take your time. Brian.
Okay, so let me I think that there's a systemic solution. I'm fine with backstopping deposits, and by using the rest of the banking industry to do it. They haven't fully done that with this current thing, but that's basically the path that they're on. Insurance claims, life insurance claims, they have those completely set up where the entire industry at the state level, blah blah blah, they cover insurance. So no matter if insurance company goes under, the claims are still covered. The same thing for deposits. You can say this thing is something that gets fully covered, and you set the system where the entire industry says we will make sure, no matter what happens to each individual bank, all claims are covered. Similarly, all deposits are covered. And you just integrate that into the system, and this is the way it works. And it's socialized throughout it doesn't go to the federal level, or then they go to the government per se, other than running the system. But all the banks have to say we will cover all deposits.
Okay, but can you see the systemic risk that if bank run and all the banks are guaranteeing all the deposits, all the banks get run on, then you have a massive bank run and the entire system collapses?
Right. Yeah,
what
there is
stops that?
I have to for a bit, so I have to hop up, mute myself for a bit because it'd be quite loud. But yeah, I see the systemic risk, but my alternative is to look at the insurance claim model for making sure that, because people want to say insurance is good, life insurance, whatever insurance, that always I get my claims covered. So that is the alternative financial model where, and no one's saying that thing is the system there is somehow government, whatever. It's set up from the get-go to be 100% secure on claims. The insurance company can blow up, but the claims part is bulletproof, 100%.
Okay, I just want to I want to cover this point because I feel like Bradford, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm with you, Warren. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think a committee should be running the U.S. economy or influencing with their thumb on the U.S. economy. Committees tend to be late when you have groupthink. Usually decisions get made 6 months, 9 months too late. The Fed was too late to act to raise rates, and they're probably going to cause a policy error and be too high for too long. I think there should be some kind of rule where the money system is run. So limiting how much money gets put out there a year, and maybe it's based off of population growth or growth in the economy. But I agree with you that we should allow inflation, allow deflation. I think we should get into this later on. Just want to enter the conversation.
Yeah, so I just want to, cover this point a little bit. There's this, what we live in a world where we want to trust that everything's okay. Someone comes along and says, "I have a solution. I'll take care of this for you." And if you're a Trump fan, Trump comes along and you just believe in the guy and you trust him. If you're a Democrat and you get in, then you just trust him. And then you get, somebody appointed as a chair of the Federal Reserve, and he's got a PhD in economics and he's got all these credentials. And you're like, okay, we've got the experts in charge. We're okay. And you've got, public health. I won't go down that road, but some of us have lost trust in the experts in a variety of fields over the last 10 or 20 years and longer. I mean, you go back to when they told us that how powerful the Soviet Union was, and then the Berlin Wall fell. And we've just had decades of evidence that the people who claim to be experts are wrong so often. But we want to know that there's somebody authoritative who's taking care of things and protecting us. And I think some sort of decentralized system, which is now technologically available and wasn't before, that we can trust in an open source cryptocurrency, we can trust in a course crowdfunding, crowd lending system. And the question is, and then, if we have cryptocurrency, then we don't worry about government managing the dollar. And I think Milton Friedman had advocated, we just have a fixed, this is he's going to be printed every year, and you take it out of the hands of government controlling or the Federal Reserve controlling how much money is printed. But but it's, fundamentally, these ideas, they sound good and they make you feel better, but then when it blows up, you're like, what happened? And then the response that a lot of people have is they point fingers. And I just want to come back to this point that we had a system before. We've had a system for decades. I think FDR created back in the 30s, the government created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And, initially it was like $2,500 of deposits were protected. And now it's 250. It's raised every once in a while, not in any consistent pattern, right? It's like there's a crisis in 2008. Okay, it was 100,000. Now we got to make it 250,000. Well, now we've basically made it infinite. And now I wonder, well, do we even need the FDIC at all anymore? Maybe the FDIC has become irrelevant, but no government agency ever goes away. So now we have this agency with 5,000 plus employees, probably averaging $150,000 $200,000 a year in salaries that we're spending money on that are no longer relevant because the Fed has just basically said we're going to have all deposits. So why bother having the FDIC anymore? And you just have one more layer of complexity, one more institution of power, and one more area for potential corruption. And you still have the systemic risk. You want to believe that we've got the best and the brightest in charge, and they're taking care of things, and everything's okay. Everything's going to be okay. But when you create this increasing complexity, and when you have this fundamentally unstable system, fractional reserve banking, fiat currency, et cetera, what we don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm Chicken Little. Not Chicken. Is it Chicken Little? The sky is falling. I think since around 2013, I've been concerned about that, economic collapse. That there's going to be some way or another. Our system is fundamentally broken. We have government borrowing like crazy amounts of money. The national debt is growing like gangbusters, and you can point to your president and say, well, that president's worse than my president, and the other side will point to your president and say he's worse. And I don't like Republicans or Democrats. To Republicans, I'll say Ronald Reagan doubled federal spending and tripled the debt. And you can blame Congress all you want. Look at the budgets that Reagan submitted to Congress. He was raising spending himself, and he was planning on borrowing. And Dick Cheney famously said to someone, Reagan proved deficits don't matter, so don't put on the Democrats. And Democrats, you want to get out of this? No, you guys are in on it too. And Biden's spending like crazy, and Trump spent like crazy. It's like bipartisan that government is borrowing, and it's basically accepted. Then you have money printing, which was always an issue. And, Nixon broke the connection to the dollar back in like 1972. And we went to total fiat currency. There was a theory, which I never really bought, that having the dollar connected to precious metal somehow made it secure. And I don't think it really did. Give me 1 second, Bradford. And then on top of that, you have this. So you have the risk of overprinting money. You have the risk of borrowing too much money. And if you look back at history, you see countries where, or points in history where governments borrowed too much and debased the currency, printed too much money, and they leads to a massive economic collapse. On top of that, we have something that I don't think any point in history had before. We have something called unfunded liabilities. In the United States, Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits, there are certain things where the government has effectively promised to 100 million plus people, promised to people, hey, we're going to give you this pension payout. It might be a state pension, or we're going to pay for your health care for seniors or veterans or whatever. And it's like, I don't know, over $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities on top of the debt. So we didn't even have that problem before in history. So we didn't even have that to trace. And you look at all this, and we just know in history, these things tend to economic collapse. Now, I suppose we can believe that the best and the brightest who are running the Federal Reserve and running the federal government, running the U.S. Treasury, running the European Central Bank, and all these other countries, and at a global level, the International Monetary Fund, the World Economic Forum, or whatever these, they're all smart enough. They'll take care of it. They know what they're doing. But they thought that before. You had economic collapses in other places. They had some guy who was really good at this and had all this experience, and it still blew up. So I actually worry that we're headed to like the biggest economic collapse in history. Now, maybe that's 30 years from now. Maybe it never happens. Maybe if you follow Kathy Wood in particular, Kathy Wood, for those who don't know, Kathy Wood is the founder or the head of a exchange traded fund series. The company's called ARK Invest, and she's a big Tesla nut. And I mean that in a positive way because I'm a big Tesla nut. And she believes that and I think this is generally well established, that as technology improves, it's deflationary. That, that 65-inch TV that I'm looking at right now cost $400, and it used to be a 32-inch, crappy cathode ray tube TV was over $1,000. And you can see a lot of deflationary effects from technology. So will the deflationary effects of technology outpace the inflationary effects of all these policies? I don't know, but I think we're facing systemic risk, and the economy could collapse tomorrow. It could collapse, next year. It could collapse in 30 years, and I could be wrong, and it never collapses. But to me, that's the thing we should be worried about more than anything else. Is we don't want to have another Great Depression. We don't want to have a hyperinflation. We don't want to have situations where everything blows up, and you have massive economic distress across not just the U.S. but multiple countries. That's the thing that I'm more fearful of than anything else. And I think as we increase our reliance on this banking system that's fundamentally fragile, as we increase the complexity of this system, as we increase the concentration of power at the center, the federal government, just like a little bit of a rant on something else. Up until around 1910 or 1920, before World War I, basically, and really after World War I for a little while, if I remember correctly, total government spending in the United States, federal, state, and local combined, was about 5% of GDP or less. Most people had almost no interaction with federal or state government. They may have had some interaction with local government. The governments didn't really get involved in the daily lives of individuals. You didn't pay income tax until whether it was 1913 or something like that. And then somewhere between Woodrow Wilson and World War I, FDR, somewhere in there, government started growing, and now government is something like 40% of the. I would argue it's 50% of the economy. You add in the regulatory state, and government is now effectively controlling something like 50% of the economy, where in the past it controlled 5% of the economy. Governments, federal, state, and local combined. And I think that's fundamentally a bad thing. I think that's fundamentally dangerous for society, that it's this massive concentration of power. And I think all of these things come together, and there's a lot of people talking about the benefits of crypto. I don't think the crowd lending idea that I'm talking about gets talked about that much, but I think these are a much better path forward. And I've been rambling for a while. Let me give Brian a chance to say something. Brian, I've been rambling. Do you have anything to say? And if anybody wants to raise your hand and speak, let me know.
Give me another 5-10 minutes. I'm driving. We'll have the rain stuff.
Okay.
So.
All right. So yeah, if anybody wants to chip in and has questions or comments, I think, there's no system's going to be perfect. And we also have the problem that we have this massive debt, and we have these unfunded liabilities. And, like, it's not like government, let's say, is on a path to balance it. The federal government is far from balancing its budget. Bradford, are you in? I can't tell if you're in. You've requested, but I can't bring you up. Let me cancel your invite and invite you again. Add a speaker. Bradford, can you speak now? Oh, we lost him. All right. So, when you look at the system, like we have a system where the government owes a lot of people a lot of money, trillions, maybe, hundreds of trillions of dollars when you add it all up. And then, those people are going to be paid back. If you break the current system, if you say we're going to wipe out this system, or we're going to go to a cryptocurrency, crowd lending system, whatever. I mean, I haven't mapped out what that system is, but if you go to that system, well, what about all the people who are owed money? What about all the people who have, these are expecting their Social Security and so on payments? And it's not going to be an easy transition, but if we don't come to grips with the fact that the system is fundamentally flawed, I think we're screwed in the long run. Bradford, go ahead.
So people are still going to worry about crises that will happen without the Fed or without this heavy hand. So humans were natural. We're going to overinvest. We're going to panic and have these cycles, even if things were more market driven. So, what do you say to the people that worry about the crisis where the government doesn't step in and soften the blow?
Well, I think the whole point is when you have the system we have, I was actually going to hit on this point. In insurance, we have this concept of adverse selection and moral hazard. So, moral hazard is when you know you're insured, you take more risks because you know the government's going to step in, or the insurance is going to step in and pay for if it blows up. When you adverse selection is when you have a world where risks are covered, then people who are more risky are more likely to opt into the system. So people who take more risks are more likely to opt into the system. So, in other words, when you're selling insurance, the people who buy the insurance are people who are more likely to have a problem, right? There's this huge challenge in managing insurance. So if you create a system that has these backstops, then you're encouraging risky behavior. So yeah, you're going to have risky behavior, but do you want more of it? I mean, maybe you do. Maybe that increased risky behavior increases economic growth. I would just say if you go back to the 1800s, you had a system that people weren't able to trust everything as well as they do now. And there were some instabilities, there were some issues, but I would rather live in a world where I have a choice not to live in total chaos, and I have a choice not to take these risks. And if other people decide to play the risky game, then they lose when the risks blow up. We're crawled now where we're basically letting people engage in risky behavior and protecting them from the consequences of that risk taking. And we've told people, hey, you can trust these banks. And we're basically passing on, which I understand. We want people to have a safe place to invest. We want people to have a safe place to store their money. We want people to have a place to borrow from. But the system we have appears to be safe, but may not be. Bradford, go ahead.
So let's go along those lines and talk a little bit about the pandemic response. There was the payroll protection plan, or whatever it was, the PPP, and people are all worried about their local restaurants, their local businesses, things like that. There was this big push to protect them. But I thought at the time that a lot of these businesses are essentially hobbies. And, if there's a really good restaurant or a really good local business that is very profitable beyond, just being someone's hobby, that, they could take a break and come back to the business and it would be fine. You want to talk a little bit about that, the PPP and all that, failure of businesses?
I think there's two things about that. Number one, we created the system in response to COVID where wealthy people got to borrow money and were told, don't worry, you won't have to pay it back. I mean, I have friends who got substantial paycheck protection loans for this one particular friend. They have a law firm with, I don't know, 10 employees or something like that. And they borrowed, I don't know, maybe $100,000, $500,000. I have no idea how much they borrowed. And then they don't have to pay it back. Now, I borrowed through the Small Business Administration had a loan program. I borrowed a small amount of money. I don't get out. If you knew how to play the system, and you had to have, like, if you wanted to be in the Paycheck Protection Program, I think you had to have an account with the right bank. Like, my bank didn't have that. So you had to know how to play the system in order to get in on these programs. And like ordinary people didn't have the same opportunity. So you create a system like, it's like the government handing out money to the wealthy people and screwing the poor people. I don't think that was a really good system. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree that the overall system has problems of corruption at multiple levels, at the federal level, as you and Bradford are currently discussing. Those things are broken and remain broken. The financial system, in terms of knowing the risks and how much they are, I think that can be relatively easily understood. Like in terms of the assets, overall assets and income of or asset liabilities of Silicon Valley Bank, you could see that it was underwater in terms of like it's, if you devalue its assets based on the interest rates increasing, and then having its liabilities be more than that, it was clear about the last quarter, prior quarter, in Q4, that they were in huge trouble. And that was, again, the incompetence of their CEO and executives to not look at the basic math of it and to not address it, far earlier in 2022. But in terms of like how many other banks and whatever had that problem, it's something that is relatively easy to look at. They made it a bit more difficult to see because they have this being able to hold to maturity accounting versus having this mark to market and making that more clear. So an accounting thing would make it reporting requirement would make it easy to see how much exposure there would be, and then the cascade effect issue of knowing that if these banks go under, that those banks go under, it would add certain other more complexity to it, but it could be again with certain reporting requirements, some crypto computer stuff, we could easily have those kind of things tracked as well. But that goes to the making the entire system bulletproof. Like right now, if the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government was forced to increase interest rates to 10 to 15%, whatever, like they did in the 1970s. So we know that within a 60-year period, we had interest rates go to that level. Clearly, we know that if things are breaking at the 5% level, 6% level, we know that far more would break and the entire system would likely blow up when you go to that level, which already occurred. We know within 60 years, the lifetime of many people, that this has already happened. So to say that we will not stress test or adjust this system to have it withstand something that already happened. And that does not even go to the fact that the printing 30 trillion, 50 trillion, and with 50 trillion in unfunded liabilities could trigger hyperinflation, which is like the reason you go to 20% when inflation at interest rates, when inflation at 10%, is to stop inflation, to prevent the hyperinflation scenario. So those are the overall kind of big picture financial, here's exactly how the system blows up things. And then you can work back from that to say, okay, we have to be able to withstand it. We have to set a system that doesn't do those things. So it's not, there's certain other clear, and this is how this thing fails kind of scenarios where you can run it through and see, here's how the overall system fails, either with hyperinflation or with banks blowing up, and then you work back from that to say, and here's how we keep it within the safe bounds, right? Where like where Bradford discussed talking about, where you say, a restriction on money, and you have to have it going to political actors or power actors, where no matter what idiot is in there, you set it up to not allow it to be blown up. Just like going from kings and monarchs, if we have a good king, everything's fine. If we have a bad king, things are bad, to the constitutional system and the U.S. Constitution, and try to set up a system of checks and balances where it doesn't matter relative who's in there, that the system is more robust. So because you have a setup where it's clearly fragile, it's probably impossible to get to the point where, no matter who's in there, things don't blow up. But you could certainly limit it. And if you said these guys are, the financial people are, people running banks are like people with nuclear weapons, they, mismanage things that it takes out, a million, the life savings of a million people and ruins 100,000 businesses and takes out a region, which would have happened with Silicon Valley Bank, where, a million people got employed, would blow up other banks clearly, because First Republic, even with the backstop, is at risk of failing, and other banks, in the region are at risk of failing. You would have basically Northern California and Southern California going into a .com 2001 type experience, but worse. So anyway, you have to set it up, like I say, systemic. Is the bank system broken? Yes, it is. We can make it far, far more stable by looking at other things. And I think just crowdsourcing would be insufficient, because that would not prevent you from being exposed to Chase Manhattan Bank going to 30% levered and, betting, one of their traders betting on whatever stuff and blowing up $100 billion and wrecking things. You would be caught in the tsunami of that thing when it went under. So go ahead.
Bradford?
I'm going over the mountain, so only come to me when I raise my hand. I'm wondering, who is it that benefits from these frequent crises? So let's say you're right, and that the current system causes crises more often than the actual system. Who is benefiting from the crises being the way they are and being either more frequent or bigger in magnitude?
Well,
I think
people.
sellers.
Let me address that. The people who benefit are the people who stand up and say, I know how to manage this, we're going to take, and they basically take more power. Every time you have a crisis, then you see more centralization of power. You see more concentration of power in the institutions that screwed up in the first place. And I wanted to just mention one thing really quick, and I'll let Brian go, but this idea that the banks have to disclose their portfolio of loans or whatever to regulators, like, why don't we say the banks have to make it public what their distribution of assets is, where they've what they've got, so that the public can, rather than having regulators decide whether the bank is safe, which regulators apparently decided that Silicon Valley Bank was safe, and it's like, I don't know, Fortune magazine or Forbes magazine just had, like, 5 days before the collapse, was saying it was like one of the best banks in the world. What if individuals, before they put money in a bank, could see, well, where are you guys keeping your money? And then individuals would have, the opportunity to see, this isn't where I want to hold my money, or I like the way these guys manage their money. And the only regulation is don't lie. Like, provide full information and don't lie, rather than they provide information to some regulator, the regulators apply their own tests. Like, maybe letting individuals make choices and giving individuals full information is better than having a bunch of guys with degrees getting paid a lot of money, sitting in some back room applying some stress tests that apparently don't work. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so this goes to something that I think the new technology of blockchain and crypto can and even XML, it's a tag-based system where you can give out a lot of information and that kind of stuff. So you can have, instead of just giving us a annual report, here's 100 lines showing your assets and liabilities, income and expenses, where you have to give out files with all of the loans and all the durations and stuff like that. That you have to make this more complete reporting. And I don't know if you have some, and mostly public, and then you could have plenty of smart computer people and analysts who can then go through and do a far better job of giving a stress testing of what happens if interest rate go from 5% to 7% to 8% or whatever. So far better. So this kind of crowdsourced regulatory oversight, and you could have a certain amount of I think that would be self-financing, where basically different institutions would then pay to know who's really at risk, as opposed to paying the rating agencies, who clearly have not done a good job, clearly have been corrupt since 2008. That you could then have a more trusted, transparent system, knowing and having exposing this stuff where everyone knows exactly who's had what's going on. But I do think that on top of that, you need to have this, because people can do actions very, very quickly. You'd have to have something fully automated where you have the separations of like that have the loans and the savings part be segregated more from the other one, similar to Canada, and also having the deposits. If we're saying that that's good, I still think there should be a system there where it's more like what we're already heading towards, and more like the insurance system, where here's how the claims are made bulletproof, in order to have more faith in that. But making sure that bad actors aren't doing stupid stuff, that needs to be more openly transparent. You have the calculations where everyone has the information to be able to make the proper assessments. I have to drop off and go to another thing in a few minutes here. I'll let Bradford go.
Bradford? I don't know. Bradford's in the mountains. Maybe we can't hear him. I can't hear you, Bradford. So I think one of the challenges with what Brian is talking about is he has this idea that there's some better system in Canada. And I want to believe that. I think fundamentally any system is flawed. I think the challenge with the Canadian, I don't know enough about the Canadian system, but the system that he described, I'm concerned that the system he described would actually would inhibit growth. Like, do you have a system that allows an economy to grow? But Bradford, go ahead.
So my question here, Warren, is, or my devil's advocate would be, is as you add more transparency, you could have people attack those positions that the banks have. So if they have a certain type of loan, you could have people attack that, like short sellers can attack that. I'm not sure infinite transparency is the best.
Okay, I'm going to start. I was going to take a speak. And anybody wants to comment? I want to get back to this fundamental question of, is the banking system fundamentally broken? But Bradford, go ahead before I do that. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Sorry, misclick.
Okay, so, and by the way, Brian Wang was in the space earlier. Next Big Future. Brian's claim to fame is some prediction market. He's like leading, or one of the leading predictors in that prediction market. And Bradford is a wealth manager, Halter Ferguson Financial. And I'm just a YouTuber, and you can go to my profile and see the stuff I do. Retired trial lawyer. So I just think that there's this fundamental issue, and I know we have an audience. If anybody wants to speak up, please request to speak, and I'll bring you up. I think that the banking system is fundamentally broken. I don't think it's recoverable. I think we have these huge risks long term that I'm concerned about. And I'm going to invite people up to speak. And when you have a space like this, I don't recognize this who just came up, and there will be speakers who will sabotage the system. So if you want to come up and try to sabotage the conversation, you'll get bounced quick. And I don't mean to say that about you. I just don't know who you are, Penn. But go ahead, Penn.
No, I'm not here to sabotage. In fact, I believe the banking system is not broken. I think there are people who take advantage of it, and that we've increased the moral hazard by backstopping all deposits that exceed the current FDIC limit. While I understand why the government decided to backstop everyone, it's going to create additional problems. There's not enough money in the universe to backstop all the deposits in the United States. There's always going to be a need for a financial intermediary, and that's the bank's primary function, is to match depositors with lenders. And without that function, the economy would fall apart. Banking's based on trust. There's a reserve requirement that all banks have, that they have to keep a certain amount of cash on hand in order to service their daily operations. That's a statistical guess as to what amount of cash they need to have on hand. In this case, Silicon Valley screwed up and didn't have enough cash on hand. But if you kept all of the deposits on hand 100% of the time, you wouldn't have any money to lend. And again, the whole purpose is for a bank to serve as an intermediary between the depositor who has a place to transact banking needs and somebody who needs to borrow money to create and expand a business.
All right, so let me counter that. And I don't know if you were in this space when I began. I'm suggesting that technology has changed, and we could create we have crowdfunding already. We could create a crowd lending system. It might be just as effective or even more effective than the system we have today. And we wouldn't need to backstop it. You know, you're taking a risk when you lend to somebody. I think we already have sort of micro lending. There's little, efforts to go down this road. There's not much demand for it, right? The banks are already set up to offer this service. If we decided the banking system we have is fundamentally unstable, and so there's two questions for you, Penn. One, isn't the banking system we have, and I mean the larger system, including the Federal Reserve that prints money, the federal government borrowing recklessly, unfunded liabilities, when you put it all together, isn't the system fundamentally unstable in a way that could lead to a massive economic crisis? And then number two, why isn't an alternative system where we have a decentralized cryptocurrency world and crowd lending instead of, the financial intermediaries that you described, why wouldn't that be a better system? So I gave you a lot to respond to. Go ahead.
Yeah, that is a lot to chew on. I think crypto is just another form of gold. It's just something that we all agree has some kind of value, and it's as a store of value. And I don't see that it has really any advantage over any other commodity as a store of value.
Yeah, but we only have the dollar only has value because we've agreed it has value.
Well, that's true of everything. That's true going back to the history of the beginnings of civilization. People trading have always had to trust each other to a certain degree. And that's what the banking system is it's based on trust, but we continue to break that trust, or certain people continue to break that trust. For example, at Silicon Valley, I think Roku had set 250 or 400 something million dollars on deposit there. Now, they should know better than to do that. They know the rules. Now, $250,000 isn't of a backstop. They need to raise that amount. But I don't think I should be on the hook for 250 or whatever it is, $400 million that Roku negligently deposited into one institution. They should have spread that out across numerous banks. And so I think they have some responsibility for taking their own losses in that case.
What do you
And
think?
what you were,
Go ahead.
no,
Go
you
ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask you on this larger question of systemic risk. When you take a world where you have this banking system that is effectively, now led and run by the Federal Reserve, you have the Federal Reserve printing money, controlling interest rates, trying to control inflation. You have the federal government borrowing endlessly, unfunded liabilities. Um, are we headed towards is there some like massive systemic risk that we're not talking about? And are the things that we're doing pushing us deeper into that systemic risk?
Well, the Federal Reserve was designed to provide two services. One is to ensure employment. The other was to provide stable prices across the economy. And the United States government has an interest in maintaining stability, right? And you want to keep people employed because unemployed people are unhappy and create problems for the rest of society. And so the Fed is there to try um, to keep society in a way. Some people say we should just let inflation run. If you let inflation run, that's going to hurt everybody. But if you raise rates and bring inflation down, it's going to put some people out of work. Is it better to put 2 million people out of work, or is it better for 300 million people not to be able to afford the goods and services that we're used to having?
All right, but you're constraining the choice. What about, is it better to live in a world where cryptocurrencies, this is my point, that we have technologies available to sort of change the game. Is it better to have the horrible choice that you just described, or to have a third choice of an exogenous cryptocurrency that is stated up front, this is how much additional currency is going to be created every year or every month or however you describe it, whether it's Bitcoin or Dogecoin or whatever. There's a system where we know how much currency there will be, and we can evaluate the economy and our choices based on what we know the currency will be. And we can have choice of currencies, right? Some people can decide to use Bitcoin, and some people can decide to use Dogecoin and Ethereum. And if you live in a world with decentralized cryptocurrencies, rather than a dollar that's controlled by a quasi-governmental entity and really a governmental entity, is it potentially a better choice than the choice you just described?
Some people call cryptocurrencies imaginary internet money. And I kind of lean in that camp because it's something that's kind of made up. It's based on zeros and ones in a decentralized ledger across the internet. I guess I'm old school because I don't trust if you can't hold something in your hand, like which has there's a fixed amount of gold, right, in the world. And the reason we moved away from the gold standard is because of the expanding population and the need for a larger money supply. And when you have a fixed money supply like gold, you can't grow the economy. So we went to a fiat currency, which can expand with the population and with the economy. Cryptocurrency, I believe, isn't there a fixed amount of cryptocurrency in circulation?
Michael's had his hand up. I want to give Michael a chance, and we'll continue this conversation about crypto. But
Thank
Michael,
you.
go ahead. Michael, go ahead.
Thanks, Warren. not a lot of thought on the crypto specifically, but back to the matter of trust and the banking system that we have currently. I feel like one of the bigger problems, at least in my mind, is the narrative is no longer really being controlled. Historically, the access to information wasn't there like it is today. So exposing, I think there's things being exposed, corruption within the system that people weren't privy to previously. And I think people my generation and younger, and some older, just they don't trust, the people who are running this shit. And I think it's just undermining, everything, just as more of a sweeping brush stroke. But yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I mean, I agree with that. I think there's this. I think Penn may have said this at earlier, that we have a system that's based on trust, and a lot of us are losing trust in a lot of our institutions because, frankly, our institutions are showing us that they don't deserve to be trusted. To Penn's comment about cryptocurrency being an imaginary thing, well, the dollar's an imaginary thing, and really the dollar, as I understand it, fiat currencies really are just ledgers somewhere run on COBOL mainframes. And instead of it being a decentralized currency, it's a centralized, fictional item. And we have this funny green paper in our pockets, trust it. And we're headed towards. This is where I worry about hyperinflation. Is we're headed towards a point where at some point you're going to look at that green piece of paper in your pocket and you're say, I'm not sure this is going to be worth as much tomorrow. I better spend it now. And if you end up in a world where people start looking at that, that's when you head toward hyperinflation. And I'm not saying that's the way the system's going to collapse. I'm just saying that's one way historically that systems like this collapse. And I just worry that hang on, let me just give Jeff a chance. I'm trying to give different people a chance to speak on this, because I think a lot of people are concerned in a lot of ways. And Penn, I'm going to come back to you in a minute. We'll see if Jeff is able to connect. I'm getting a connecting but connected yet thing. So, all right, while we're waiting to see if Jeff can connect, Penn, go ahead.
A little bit off the subject, but you talked about trust in government and trust in institutions and rampant inflation. Part of that's due to the $30 trillion debt that the United States government has. And I think the only way we're really going to be able to solve that is by raising taxes. And people aren't going to like that. It's not popular. And no politician's going to talk about it. Nobody's going to campaign on it. But I think it's necessary.
Okay, so first of all, I don't think I just bounced somebody from. I invited somebody up to speak, or somebody requested to speak, and I invited them, and it didn't work. So if that was you, I think it's Jeff. Either try again, or my suggestion is quit the space and come back and try again. I'm sorry that it didn't work out. And, that's just one of those technologies. Now I lost what you said. Sorry, Penn.
No, I sort of shifted the conversation. I think the banking system, because it is built on trust, I think it still works. We just need to build the trust back into it. And the United States government yesterday tried to backstop that trust by guaranteeing all deposits. That worked for a day, but I don't think you can backstop every deposit in every bank in the United States forever without creating problems on down the road. So therefore, I think some people should have lost some of their money that they had on deposit at Silicon Valley Bank. They knew what the rules were, but they didn't follow those, right? They knew what the limits were for FDIC.
Well, I think there's a bunch of different things in there. I just want to, oh man, my brain is just not working fully. So just so Jeff, I see that Jeff is connecting. I got to notice that Jeff can speak, but I don't think Jeff, you want to try to speak and see if it works? I'm getting the feeling that his connection isn't working either. Penn, one of the things you said was that at some point we're going to have to raise taxes to pay off the debt. And I'm going to say that when you combine the debt and the unfunded liabilities, I don't think you can raise taxes enough to get there. I think it actually ends up being fundamentally impossible to get there. It may not work. Like, if you end up with debt to GDP at 300 or 400% or something like that, and then you have these unfunded liabilities, and if you raise taxes enough, you wreck the economy. So I think we may have, unless the deflate consequences of increasing technology get us out of this, I think we're screwed. And Jeff, I'm sorry, it's still not working. I don't have an answer for you. I invited you up, but anybody else who wants to speak, please request to speak, and I'll have you up. Penn, what about this issue? You say we just need to raise taxes at some point. We're not going to, and even if we did, it wouldn't work. And if we did raise taxes enough, then economic output would stop, and then you have the population collapse problem. That populations are aging around the world. This isn't just a U.S. problem. This is a global problem. I mean, the banking system is a global problem, and the population collapse problem is a global problem. We're headed towards a world where we have lots of older people who aren't working anymore, and lots of younger people who are struggling to make it work, and it doesn't work.
Well, let me ask you this: what happens if you work at a job and they decide to reduce the amount that they pay you, and at the same time your expenses also increase? I mean, and that's an analogy to the tax cuts that Trump implemented. They reduced the revenue of the government, and then the pandemic hit, and our expenses increased. And we went from what, $5 trillion debt to $30 trillion. And, I don't know if anybody could have seen that coming.
I don't. Number one, I don't think the increase in debt was quite as dramatic as you're describing. I think the debt was rising. I mean, there's a big increase in debt, but I don't think we 6x'd the debt. We also massively printed money. There were a whole bunch of things, and we basically, I think we had a absolutely, and I know some people are going to get mad at me. We had absolutely the wrong response to the pandemic. We had, before the COVID hit, the best and the brightest had laid out plans for how we're going to handle a pandemic that was worse than COVID. And the answer was keep everything as normal as possible, keep the economy as normal as possible. And then somehow all that, this idea that we have the best and the brightest making plans for the future, and we've got this plan in place if something bad happens, is fiction, because when something bad happens, we don't follow the plan. But I think that, there's a massive increase in debt. That's absolutely, but we've been massively increasing the debt for decades, and we've been increasing money printing and so on and so forth. Let me give, I think her name is actually Heather, not Audrey. Let me give Heather a chance to speak.
Hey, you're not supposed to tell people who I am.
I'm sorry about that. Love you though. Go ahead.
How are you doing this morning? I just was going to talk about the fact that I think what the Fed did, or what the Treasury and the Fed backstopping the bank, was just horrible, because I think it sent a message to the world that we will take care of our own. It sent a message to all the other central bankers saying that we'll take care of our own, and the rules don't apply to us, don't apply to America. And that was huge. And the question is, will other central banks stop buying our debt because of this? So I think that's a big question that we need to think about, because what we just did was so wrong. We basically just said we're socializing the banking system now. Not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, that's the ways I see an American economic collapse is if right now where the dollar is the global reserve currency, the Chinese economy is growing. We keep seeming to screw up we keep shooting ourselves in the foot in a variety of different ways. Sometimes the rest of the world shoots itself in the foot. Sometimes it's just us. But we may come to a point in the world where there's a shift away from the dollar as the global reserve currency, and that could have massive ramifications. But actually, Audrey, since you're here, Audrey is a big believer in cryptocurrency, and I've suggested that we, I don't know that the transition would be easy, but given that the system we have is not working, and I know you're a bigger proponent of cryptocurrency than I am. I'm sort of like, I think cryptocurrency is interesting. Do you think there's a path to where we could have a world where we go away from a fiat currency, or we still have the fiat currency out there and people want to stay with the dollar, can stay with the dollar, but we allow cryptocurrencies to thrive and function as currencies? I mean, just before I get to you, I just want to say, for people who don't know, government doesn't like competition. It prosecutes competition. And cryptocurrencies are competition for government's control of the dollar. If the dollar is the prevailing form of currency, and people are stuck with the dollar and don't have another choice, then government has a lot of power. If all of a sudden people start using Bitcoin for transactions, or Dogecoin or Ethereum for transactions, that takes away from the power of people who control the fiat currency. And I'm not proposing we eliminate the dollar. I'm proposing we allow cryptocurrencies to thrive. We stop having government try to control cryptocurrencies and prosecute people who do things that government doesn't like related to cryptocurrencies. And ultimately what would happen is people would trust I believe people would trust cryptocurrencies more than they would trust the dollar. And you can have asset-backed cryptocurrencies, and there's all kinds of ways you could make that work. And then we would have a more stable financial system that's decentralized and so on. That's my pitch for it. Audrey, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime, put it that way. I think what you're going to see is that the dollar is going to stay the world reserve currency. And I really believe that because, not just because of our military and everything else, but because someone gave a great analogy. You can't take like the digital yuan that's coming out now and like stick it in and the new world reserve currency, because it's like putting Gatorade in your body instead of blood. You just change it that fast. So we're not going to have Bitcoin do the same thing. It's just not going to happen. I think I think the dollar will save the world reserve currency for gosh knows how long. But I do think that as governments continue to control more and more and more, people will look for different ways to shadow bank, and they will look for like Bitcoin and other cryptos, and they'll use it for Airbnbs, they'll use it for, their oranges and food, with street vendors, and it will grow. But I think we're talking like many, many, many years before something ever happens to the point where the dollar or the digital dollar ever is taken down.
And Audrey, do you have any thoughts on, one of my suggestions was we go away from a world where we have these financial intermediaries called banks that take our deposits and lend our money out to others, and we say, you know what, I don't need the bank to decide what to do with my money. In fact, I don't have a lot of, I don't keep much money in banks. I'm largely invested in Tesla stock. I own equity in a house. I own some other stocks. I have some amount of cash in banks, but very little. I would rather, live in a world where I decide who I want to lend money to, and we create some sort of like micro lending system or crowd lending system akin to crowdfunding. Do you see that having to replace? Do you see that having potential to replace banks? Is there something we need banks for that we can't allow this to happen?
Well, I think the consolidations of the banks have begun. So I think we're going to centralization of the banks. They are literally trying to get rid of the small banks as we speak, because that way they have more power, and that way the Fed can just control most everything, and only have like a handful of big banks. So I do think that, yeah, I mean, we could try to fight back and do what you're suggesting, but I don't know. I don't know if it would win. I mean, I see, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, all those, I mean, they just gave Silicon Valley Bank to HSBC, and HSBC is a disaster. I mean, on the books, honestly. So I don't see how this ends prettily without a major consolidation first of smaller banks. So you can certainly fight by doing a more like roots up idea, but honestly, I don't see it happening like we're a smaller bush, unfortunately. and things like that, community driven.
Penn, Audrey and I have been talking for a while. Do you have any thoughts?
I'm working on my taxes. I was printing out some forms. Crypto, I think maybe eventually we'll move away from the dollar as the world currency, as people get smarter and begin to understand that its utility is better than the current system. I can just snap your fingers and change overnight from one system to another.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting we allow cryptocurrencies to thrive and stop interfering with their growth, and then it happens over time.
And in your case, you said you don't use banks much, that you invest in Tesla, which is fine. But let's say I'm a business guy and I have an idea for a business and I need to build a factory, but I have capital to do that. Where do I go to get the capital?
Right. Well,
Usually,
so there's the issue is we've created this shortcut solution, which is you can borrow money from a bank, and now the bank is making somehow the bank, which may or may not be qualified to decide whether your business idea is good, is taking my money that I've deposited in the bank and lending it out to someone that the banker has decided he trusts to lend money to, which may not be a good decision, rather than letting me make the decision whether, if you create a crowd lending system, I can decide whether to lend that guy money. And we already have a system, raise money from angel investors, from venture capitalists. They can eventually do an IPO. They can sell. This is another thing. Like, I'm going on a wild tangent here, but if you want to invest in, let's say, SpaceX, or you want to invest in the Boring Company or Neuralink, and I want to invest in all three of those companies, it's highly regulated investing in a privately held company like that. You can't just, you have to be an accredited investor. There's a whole bunch of hoops that have to be jumped through. They have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops. You end up having massive costs. If you want to invest in a fund that got to invest in these companies, well, number one, you have to be an accredited investor. You have to have, something like a $1 or $2 million net, some other qualifications maybe. You have to pay, like, when I've looked at this before, you might have to pay like a 6% commission to get in on one of these funds. Then you got to pay a management fee of 2% a year. Then when you have a liquidity event, 20% of the profit goes to the people running the fund. As compared to, I can invest in Tesla and I just buy it on the stock market and I pay a commission and I hold it and I get I don't pay a management fee or anything. So when you create systems where everything is controlled and you have, and what ends up happening, by the way, is people who invest with VCs, people who are wealthy or accredited investors who can invest with VCs, sometimes make a crazy amount of money because they choose the right VC. And those of us who aren't that wealthy, we're excluded from that opportunity. Right? We end up with a segment of the market is controlled by banksters. I'm going to say banksters instead of bankers, who decide who they're going to lend money to, and then venture capitalists and probably wealthy people get to play in markets we don't get to play in. And that's just another example of the imbalance in the system, the effective corruption of the system, and the way that it screws regular people and benefits those who are insiders. I don't know, Matt, you gave me thumbs down. No, maybe I'm trying to figure out if Matt agrees with me. Yeah, and again, if anybody wants to speak up, go ahead and speak up. Penn, am I addressing what you raised there?
well, I think everybody has the right to do with their money as they choose. I was born into a system where banks exist, and it's going to be hard for me to change. I'm of a certain age to where new ideas are I'm resistant to to new ideas. That doesn't mean the new ideas aren't good and that they won't be better than what we currently have.
Yeah, but Penn, you and I were born into a world that didn't have the internet, didn't have smartphones. We had like a wall phone or a desk phone that was connected to a wall. That was like wired to a
Right.
system, and now we've adapted to and right now a bunch of us are adapting to a world of electric self-driving cars from gasoline cars we have to drive ourselves. There's all kinds of technological change that's happening all around us, and I would argue our education system. We were born into a certain education system. There's an opportunity to do education in a completely different way, and the educational establishments don't really like that change happening because maybe I don't need to put my kid in school. Maybe I can homeschool my kid. Maybe all this technology makes that easier. And maybe I don't need to go to college. Maybe I just learn to code in a boot camp and I can get a job from that. The world changes in a lot of ways. And like I said, I'm not suggesting we destroy the banking system overnight. I'm just suggesting we allow alternatives to flourish. You say you can do whatever you want with your money. No, you can't. I can't invest in SpaceX or the Boring Company or Neuralink or a variety of startups because, let's say not me, but there are people out there who aren't accredited investors. And all the regulatory hurdles have made it harder for me to invest in those companies. And the regulatory hurdles have made it harder for those companies to raise money from investors, supposedly telling them we're making you safe by setting up all these regulatory hurdles. And then, of course, it doesn't really make anybody safer. It just increases expenses for the company that's trying to do the startup and makes it harder for that company to succeed. Does it really? Are all these regulations really making us safer? Or, and we can still invest money in stupid investments like we could have bought stock in Silicon Valley Bank, and that would have been a bad investment, and they didn't protect us from that mistake. So,
yeah, it's a huge topic. I mean, and there's a lot to talk about. One thing I like to mention, and I'll probably sign off with this, is 22 analysts were following Silicon Valley Bank, and they had an average price target of $268 per share, right up until the bank failed.
right.
So
Well, sorry. What was the price? So the price is now
268.
zero.
Yeah, and now it's worthless. If you had equity, if you had owned stock in the bank, you lost it all. But the 22 Wall Street analysts who are supposed to, know about this stuff had no inkling that it was coming. So we get to the rating systems like Moody's and S&P Global and whatnot. How much can we trust, and why do we trust their evaluations of these companies?
Well, those are the people that I think technically Tesla is still rated as a junk bond when Tesla's bonds are still red bonds. I think
Right,
one of the companies has given them investment grade status, but I think the other one hasn't. So
right.
and that's let me just bring it back to the start of the title of the space. We just had a banking crisis that seems to be resolved. We'll see how the week goes, whether it's just the banking crisis that almost ends up not being a crisis. We've had banking crisis situations in the past. I think the banking system is fundamentally unstable. It's fundamentally broken. And I think the steps that we're seeing taken over the last 20 plus years, 10, 20 years or whatever, I think those steps give people the short-term sense of security, but may impair the long-term stability of the system. I think technology has given us the opportunity to shift from a world of currency controlled by government and our financial system controlled by these big banks to where we could shift to a world where currency is decentralized by with different cryptocurrencies, still allowing the dollar to exist, and we allow crowdlending to thrive and other small scale decentralized investment and lending and borrowing and savings situations to flourish, while still allowing the banking system exist, and see if that ends up leading us to a better place than the place we're in now. And sorry, just really quick, I believe that these problems are all compounded by the federal government borrowing and spending recklessly, and then no plan to ever resolve our national debt, unfunded liabilities, excessive regulation, and so on and so forth. Sorry, Audrey, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I agree with you. It would be wonderful if that could happen, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think if anything, once the digital dollar comes into play, like the digital yuan is already right now, they will be able to, penalize you based on your votes. They'll be able to penalize you on whether or not you didn't pay your mortgage on time. I think Ford is putting out, I think it just did a patent for the ability to lock your car up for you if you haven't paid your car mortgage. I'm not saying that right, but anyways, the point is that this digital currency that's coming will give the government ultimate controls, and if they control the on and off ramps, it's going to make Bitcoin and the other cryptos so much harder to fight that. I do think it all boils down to, like you said, people have to wake up and people have to fight it, but they're not going to fight it as long as the dollar's in control, and the dollar's in control based on our very, very, very top-heavy government system that we have, and the Fed and the Treasury and everything like that. So I don't see how this is going to happen. The community startups and stuff like that. I don't see it.
Okay, I'm trying to add, it's not working. I wanted to go back. Sorry, Jeff had wanted to speak and was not able to come up. And Jeff emailed me and he says he wanted to point out that crypto solves the speed of transaction problem that fiat currency solved for trading in gold. It's no time to move from fiat to crypto so we can keep up with the increase in speed of our civilization. Yeah, in a sense, I think the current system we have, cryptocurrencies could actually make financial transactions more efficient. I think there's really hope for that. And Doug was trying to speak, and I'm sorry, Doug. If you want to DM me, Doug, then I can look at your DM and I can figure out, and I can try to, say whatever you want to say. I just think I think we kind of have blinders on at the risk of some sort of like large scale economic collapse. And I will just say to people, not financial advice, I'm joking there, but, if you try to take a minute to think, and are we facing some sort of existential risk of, financial collapse or other when we have, excessive government debt, excessive government, money printing, funded liabilities? Is there some, and look at history and you see that this stuff has blown up before. And are you ready for some kind of blow up? How much, if the grocery store shelves went empty, which we saw during COVID, right? We saw some grocery store shelves going empty. If it got worse and the grocery store shelves were empty for weeks and maybe they weren't coming back, how long would you last? Like, how much food do you have stored up? How much water do you have available if the water stops running? Like, I know that sounds crazy, but if we have like a massive systemic collapse, I don't know where that goes. And I hate to be a fear monger, but I do worry about that. Audrey, am I getting carried away?
A little bit. I'll come to your house though, but a little bit. No, I just think they'll print their way out like they've been doing. They'll just patch it and print it. And I mean, I don't think, I think as long as the dollar is the world reserve currency, it isn't going to happen. There's a whole bunch of people talking about multipolarity going around right now. They're saying that, we're going to have the yuan compete with the dollar. It's not going to happen. I mean, not until, okay, if they take down our military, and if by chance somehow all of Asia, and all of Africa and all of the Middle East comes and attacks us and puts every nuke toward us, yes, maybe, but that's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. We're blessed geographically, first of all, with, and we've got our nice comfort zone between Canada and Mexico, which we are now nearshoring all of our stuff to Mexico, but we'll see how that goes, because I think Mexico wants to apply for the BRICS. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but who knows. But we might have multipolarity in commodities, which actually would fuel more inflation, but we're not going to have a situation where we're going to run out of eggs and milk and the water's going to turn off. I just don't see it. Now, that being said, I am watching all these derail, and I'm watching all the plants get blown up. And clearly, these are, you know, more than accidents. And they're happening on a watch when the CIA and the FBI should be paying attention. So something is coming down the road. And I think what's coming down the road is we will see, you know, a big waterfall moment in the stock market eventually. And I think they'll use that opportunity to blame it on the fact we need to start building our infrastructure back up. They'll be like, look, our infrastructure really sucks. Let's build it back up. And that will be their excuse. So that's just what I think. I think the multipolarity thing is not overblown in the commodities arena, but it's overblown in terms of the monetary arena. I think we're sticking with the dollar, and the dollar is like, what do they always say? It's the cleanest of the dirtiest shirts. And I think we're going to stick with that.
Okay. So Crow, I'm gonna get to you in a second. I just want to know, Doug was trying to speak, and our vaunted technology didn't work because Elon hasn't fixed Twitter yet. But Doug wanted to speak, and I couldn't get him up here. He said there's a vast difference between Bitcoin and all the cryptocurrencies. I recommend people read the Bitcoin standard and the fiat standard. I would just respond to that by saying, I'm not telling people we should date one cryptocurrency. I'm saying we let cryptocurrencies flourish, and if one of them takes hold as the dominant cryptocurrency, that's great. I think we would probably end up in a world with multiple cryptocurrencies, and that would be just fine. And we would manage. I think we would do well with that. But Crow, go ahead.
I mean, it's a well-known thing in a lot of different communities. It's called the Great Reset. There are multiple peoples in multiple companies and government organizations trying to do it. They're trying to they want to install universal basic income. There are many people in the AI industry, which I'm in, and I'm part of it. We're trying to crash the economy because the whole system based on currency is trash. There are other ways to do this that don't require that.
Okay, so let's talk about the Great Reset. My understanding, this is going off on a tangent, and this is like we're entering conspiracy theory land, which I love.
It's not a conspiracy.
No, hang on. What I'm saying is that there's this the standard response when we talking about stuff like that is the mainstream media will say we're conspiracy theorists. Now, it turned out that most of our conspiracy theories, or at least many of our conspiracy theories over the last 3+ years, have turned out to be true. So there can be a conspiracy theory that's actually true. Just because it's a conspiracy theory doesn't mean the conspiracy doesn't exist. And the word conspiracy exists for a reason. There are conspiracies. But I'm sorry, Crow, I just want to give Metaphor had come up before and or wanted to come up before, and I didn't give him a chance to speak, and I want to give him a chance. And I want to come back to this Great Reset topic. Metaphor, go ahead.
You can continue on this topic. I was actually going to bring up a different topic around cryptocurrencies and ACH.
Okay, so let's go with the Great Reset. Crow, my understanding of the Great Reset is that there are some shadowy forces in the background that have decided the current global system is bad and we need to destroy the current global system and start with a new system. And that sounds a little traumatic to me. And it sounds like the people who would do this would be the ones who end up with a lot of power at the end result of that. If we'd ended up in a world of decentralization and have concentrations of power, I might be cool with that. But I have a feeling there'd be some trauma along the way. What's your thoughts on how the Great Reset would actually play out, and would somebody end up with a concentration of power at the end?
So it will have a concentration of power, but that's already like that anyway, right? At least in this way, the concentration won't be so hard. It won't be so hard on the everyday person, right? So the first thing that's got to happen is the economy needs to be on the path to crashing. At the same time, robotics are being built and AGI is coming about. And that's what's happening right now as we speak. Multiple companies like Tesla and Samsung are making smart glasses and robots for household chores and mundane tasks. And eventually these companies are going to see no reason to hire a human employee when they can buy a robot and never have to hire an employee there again. So places like McDonald's and all these like minimum wage jobs are going to be gone. which is only going to make the economic reset like even worse. And it's going to be a requirement that the governments are either going the little fat cats up top that are taking the crap out of the public, the people in the governments, are going to have no choice but to give us universal basic income or deal with something like the French Revolution all over again.
So, Crow, let me chime in there for a minute, okay? Because I do follow the Great Reset and everything, and I get what you're saying, but you have to understand that that implies that a greedy person in charge of the world, your Klaus Schwab and your John Kerry and everybody who's involved and goes to Davos are all going to be on the same page. We've seen right now that Putin's not on the same page. We've seen right now that Xi's not on the same page. So what's going to stop the Great Reset, believe it or not, is greed. Greed is what's not going to allow it to happen. Okay, because
greed is the greed is the whole thing that the Great Reset is trying to fix.
No, but the Great Reset, the
of
plan
course,
of the Great
war
Reset
between
is
altruism, and you're right. It's a war between altruism and greed. You're not wrong at all.
No, I know, but I'm just saying for the Great Reset to be implemented and to come about completely in that utopian vision that they have,
are you aware of what
everyone
happened
would
in
have
the
to
French
work together.
Revolution? Are you aware of what happened in the French Revolution?
I am aware what happened in the French Revolution.
The aristocracy was held up in their castle because they were going to die if they didn't do what they were told.
Yeah, no, I agree that, but
I don't want to point it towards that, but that's.
Let me pause you both for a second. Hang on, let me pause you both for a second because Jeff has been trying to get up to speak, and we finally somehow got past our technological issues, and I want to give Jeff a shot.
Nice. I will say before he does, basically a civil war between the rich and the poor.
Yeah, I'm concerned. I'm concerned about that as one possible scenario. But Jeff,
hey, thanks, Warren. I don't have anything interesting to add except that my old fat fingers typed no instead of now in that email that I sent you. The point was that now is the time for crypto to solve the speed of operation, and then I think the problem that I was running into was I was trying to connect on an Android device. I switched to an iPhone. iOS, and it worked first time. So there you go, Apple.
All right, very good. So I want to come back, Crow. I love where you're taking this conversation. But before I want to come back to that. Oh, sorry, Penn, go ahead.
I just want to say that I'm on an Android and everything seems to be working just fine.
Yeah, it's just weird. We're in a weird technological world, but Jeff is apparently so well placed that he gets to have an Android and an iPhone. It's amazing.
Right. And Lord knows we should let technology take over our economic system as a result, right?
Obviously. Well, technology has taken over our economic system. It's just a question how much we let it. But I'm sorry. I'm going to come back to the Great Reset, but I want to give Metaphor a chance to go before we dive more into the Great Reset because I love the Great Reset. It's a great topic. But Metaphor, you've been waiting for a while. Go ahead with what you want to say, and we'll come back to the Great Reset.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, folks do mention often that the cryptocurrencies are advantageous because they're faster. I think the key differentiation between cryptocurrencies and the current ACH process is whether you want to have a decentralized ledger or a centralized ledger. As long as you let the Fed have the centralized ledger, you're going to eventually have to have a sync point. And so ACH is the protocol. And it's really not that hard to speed it up. They've already sped it up from 2 days down to 1 day, and they extended it by 2 hours. And they just last year increased the transaction limit from 100,000 to 1 million. And the Fed just goes slowly on these things. But I don't think speed of transactions will be a big problem for very long. It's there's no technological limits to this. It's just conservativeness on rolling out the existing process.
There's bureaucratic limits.
Yes, you could say there's bureaucratic, there's people limits, not technological limits.
Okay, so let's go back to the Great Reset. So I'm trying to understand, like my impression, Crow, of the Great Reset is that there are shadowy forces, like maybe it's Bill Gates, maybe it's Klaus Schwab. I don't know who's behind this, and they want us to convert us from eating beef to eating bugs or something like that. So it sounds to me like you're talking about a different great reset than the one I've heard about.
Yeah, the one you're talking about is the conspiracy theory version. Mine's the real one.
Okay, so lay this out for me, because I never, just really quick, my view on this grand conspiracy theory thing is that I don't believe in a grand conspiracy of evil geniuses. I believe in like thousands of small conspiracies of people of roughly average intelligence, and sometimes they coalesce into one big mess. But what is the great reset? I'm excited to
Yeah,
hear
because
this. What is
I
the
was
great
arguing the other one about the eating bugs and Klaus Schwab, so I want to hear this too.
Yeah, no.
So Crow, go
So
ahead.
it would restructure things to more of a resource allocation rather than money. Like for example, the universal basic income would be like if you if you already have a lot, you wouldn't be eligible, right? So like if you have a position that gives you value store, which is not the same as money, but it's similar, you wouldn't be eligible for universal basic income because you already have a house and a car and food and all these things, right? But those that are poor, homeless on the street, struggling paycheck to paycheck, that just lost their jobs, like if you're part of a company like Nvidia or Apple or Tesla or something, you don't have to worry about it. But if your previous job was working at McDonald's, you have to worry about it. So they'll give out cards that'll be similar to food stamp cards, and they might just do it in like money. They might just do it in money,
All right, but wait.
But
So let me like this. I have the
but it
rough idea
also
what you're saying,
includes
but
amenities as well. Go
who?
ahead.
But I understand you're working on this, but who are the big players behind making this happen?
A lot of the people in the AI industry and the tech industry, whether people realize it or not, the whole crypto industry, because they're draining the stock market. Every penny they put into crypto, they pull out of the stock market. There are people within the government that want this. They've been testing it in a bunch of different places, like Northwest, I think, had some tests for UBI. They've used Canada as tests. They've used some places over in Europe as tests. Elon is clearly on the bandwagon for it. He's working on the robots for it. So there's a lot.
Let me just address a couple of things. Number one,
McDonald's
let,
is
let me just
replacing
address a couple of things here.
Bros.
So number one, it's not really universal basic income if only some people get it. If only poor people get it, it's not universal. Universal basic income is everybody gets the same amount. And for those who don't know, I am a massive critic of universal basic income. It's basically half of Marxism, to each according to his need. And I think it's the wrong approach. And there is, and I like, people who know me know I love Elon. I think Elon is the greatest
So
human.
I agree,
Hang on,
but
hang on.
yeah.
I think Elon is the greatest human who ever walked the earth, but I still think he's wrong about universal basic income. And I think this idea that the machines are going to replace humans and there won't be any work left for humans misunderstands how technology ultimately works with humans. What ultimately happens is, let's suppose you make bots that can do all this great stuff, right? And they can do everything we can do. Then what happens is, I'm going to have 10 bots, and I'm going to tell the bots what to do, and you're going to massively increase the productivity of labor, and we're going to create abundance. But it doesn't mean there's no work for humans. It just means that individual humans become much more productive because technology makes us more productive. We've had massive technological change over the last 100+ years. And the most famous example of this, I have this conversation a lot, so that's why I probably sound like I'm a recording at this point, but there was this point in time where, like, people are familiar with the ATM or the cash machine. You walk up to a bank, outside of the bank, and you put a card in and it hands you cash. I come from a generation, and Penn comes from a generation probably, where you had to actually go inside the bank and talk to a human to get cash. And when the ATMs first came out, there was this perception that this is going to destroy bank teller jobs. And it was actually the reverse. ATMs made banks much more efficient, and it allowed banks to expand and open more branches. And that created more bank teller jobs that were higher value jobs because the bank tellers weren't wasting their time doing the simple stuff that a machine could do. So they ended up doing higher value stuff. I think humans are very adaptable, and whatever technology you come up with, humans are going to adapt to it, and we're going to become more productive. And that just means more is produced, and there's more available for everybody. It doesn't have to be a world.
I agree. And
Go
this
ahead,
is the
sorry.
point I was trying to make with the form of universal. There are different forms of universal basic income. The type you're talking about is the one most commonly thought of. That's not actually the only type. The purpose of universal basic income is to make sure that those that need it, the basics, get the basics. And a little tiny home or an apartment in a complex or something like that, and a food and amenities card, and maybe a little super bare minimum electric car. Like that's as basic as you can get.
Okay, so
But who's implementing
ahead,
that? Oh, but who's implementing that? The government. Again, bigger government when you have that happen. And as for our
I know
banks,
that's why we have to get to the Great Reset and force them.
that's the other thing I was going to say, Warren, is that, you know, I mean, I agree that I didn't grow up where you went into the bank. I was on the cusp of that. I never went into the bank and basically immediately got a like a credit card and an ATM card by the time I got out of high school. So I never really experienced that much. But all those bank teller jobs now are moving to India, and they're moving out of the United States. So it still kind of screws us. It screws us in America. You know,
Going into
that's a
online
problem.
banking.
all right. So let me just pause for a second and just give everybody the purpose. The reason I created this space, and we've sort of shifted the topic a bit, but I created the space on this question of whether the banking system is broken. We just had this incident towards the end of this past week where Silicon Valley Bank experienced a bank run. The government or the Fed or whatever effectively shut down 2 or 3 banks, and basically came to this point where they're seeing all bank deposits, apparently, possibly without limit, where we have this long history of how banking deposits were protected, and it was not unlimited. And my view is that the banking system is fundamentally broken, and we need to start thinking about how we train, thanks to the world of technology we have, and that's kind of how we led into the Great Reset a little bit, but how we can transition to a world where, rather than depending on this paper currency controlled by government and a system that is ultimately concentrating power in the hands of a few, can we head to a world where there's decentralized transactions through cryptocurrency and maybe the equivalent of crowdfunding, crowdlending, that takes the place of what banks do? And I'm not saying we wipe out the banks and wipe out the dollar immediately. I'm just saying we allow cryptocurrency and other alternatives to flourish. And would we end up with a more stable system? And is the system we have now heading us towards a potential massive collapse? Crow, took my concerns about heading towards a massive collapse and saying, yes, exactly, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to collapse the system so we can start over, which is, I think, super scary for lots of people, with good reason, I think. Let me ask you this question, Crow. Why shouldn't we be scared about a Great Reset?
Cricket. I mean, it's going to be a civil war. You're scared. But it's only going to be that if the rich assholes in the government don't stand down. So it's really up to them. But we know how prideful they are. It's going to go to a civil war if they don't.
Okay. So
people are going to be starving on the streets, going to beg somebody for food, and that person doesn't have food either. So it's all going to funnel into the government capital.
Okay, I'm going to push back on you on that. What I've seen, I would say to the contrary. The people who have power, the people who are insiders, the people who are benefiting massively from this system have figured out, let's give them just enough. So no one starves in America. We've had a system, an ever-growing concentration of power and wealth in America for decades, and we've gone from a world where people used to starve and, it used to be like famines or whatever. It's like now
Steve, that's
basically,
not actually true. It's that it's covered up so well. They when in
well,
big cities where there are a lot of people, homeless people try to post up their tents and they get shooed off by the police, beaten half to death to get out of
no,
the
no,
areas where they're staying.
I agree that happens in places, but there's places where it doesn't happen. But fundamentally, the greatest nutrition problem in America today is basically obesity rather than starvation. We have a massive obesity problem. We have no shortage of food, and I think those in power, the billionaires and the people who are in control and have power in government or whatever, figured out, let's give them just enough and maybe even a little bit more so they're fat and quiet. And we're not going to revolt as long as they're giving us like the absolute bare minimum, or they're even giving us more than the bare
So,
minimum, right?
Yeah,
do
I
you
want
remember
to
what
chime in
happened
there.
in the Great Depression when
Hang on,
people who should have had plenty, right? But they just lost their money and started jumping off buildings.
yeah.
This is what they're going for. They're not homeless. The homeless are already ready to fight. It's not the issue.
All right, look,
It's going to
Audrey,
be the
go ahead.
people that lose everything they have that
So,
don't know how to survive.
Crow, you're getting a little doomsday on us. So here's the thing. Since inflation, okay, I'm not a proponent of inflation, although I'm going to say two things about inflation. One, it's designed on purpose, used as a way for the government to burn off our debt, and we have a lot of debt. Okay, the government has been working hard to boost up salaries of blue collar workers. So finally, for like the first time in 40 years, blue collar workers are getting a break. They are actually able to go to the movies and they are going to a restaurant because they now have a more competitive salary, okay, because of wage inflation. Okay, so those people that were barely making ends meet, some of them are actually doing better. Not all, some. Okay, the people who are struggling right now are the white collar workers that are in tech because tech is having a massive recession. Okay, those people who had $500,000, $400,000 jobs, they're losing their jobs at Meta or they're losing their jobs at Google. They are in trouble. They will figure it out, okay? Because supposedly they went to college, they got a degree, and somehow they're going to figure out where they're going to get a job next. No one is going to be on the streets like 1929. They will not allow that to happen. As I said, they will print the money. And as long as we are the world reserve currency, they can afford to print it. We will be okay.
So I want to believe that you're right. I'm a little concerned that they will lose control, but I want to give other people a chance. So I think it's Davinsky. Honest something. Please go ahead.
Hello, Dr. Davinsky here. I just want to piggyback off what Warren was saying. So when it comes to revolts and revolution, I live in Thailand, and one of my buddies here is a biologist, and the Thai government they put them over to basically do their masters and stuff in a Western country, and because of the expenditure it costs to send them to a Western country to train them, they have to do contracts for the government for like 10 years. I don't want to say anything anti-Thai because there's a lot of issues there. But basically, his point is that until things get very bad, people don't revolt. And as the West is obviously a lot better than Thailand, there's not even really revolts here. So unless people can't eat, unless they can't drink, then there's not going to be a revolt. And wealth is very proportionate. So there was a Forbes article from about 5 years ago, and it showed the bottom 10% of Americans, income earners, have it better than 80% of the world's working population, and that's cost of living effective. So Americans are actually pretty privileged when it comes to their earning potential, the GNI per capita. This whole idea that America's about to fail, it just isn't true.
I just want to follow on that. I think, in a sense, what we've headed to is a world where we have basically unlimited food, and lots of people are getting fat. And we have a massive obesity problem, and then we've gone to I never thought about this before, but marijuana is de facto legal, and now everybody gets stoned like large. I can't believe how many people I know who are eating edibles or smoking pot, and it just creates a population that's sort of happy and quiet, and they're not going to revolt.
Yeah, it's like a subdue.
Now,
It's not really that they're just subdued, and it's like a numbing effect. I mean, at the end of the day,
Right.
if you can order Grab or Uber Eats to your phone, you can work like a minimum wage job and still have housing and stuff. Like your life is okay. It's relative poverty that people have an issue with, but relative to the rest of the world, Americans have it good. You may live in relative poverty in the USA, but you need to look at that, I guess, on a global scale and see that you actually got it pretty well off. We talk about white privilege a lot in the Western world, but the real privilege is first world privilege. I mean, the global North versus the global South. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I'm gonna come to Nasir in a second, but I just want to say, like, while it's true that there's a large swath of the population that is satisfied with their edibles and their marijuana and their alcohol and their food and music or whatever, there is a subset of us who are heavily armed and we avoid that shit. And there's an awful lot of Americans who are armed and prepared and not falling for it. And I do think there's, the revolution is not going to come from the woke. It's not going to come from the homeless. If there's going to be a revolution, it's going to be when you screw the economy up enough. I'm going to say it's like the rednecks, the armed rednecks, the militias.
That's what I was about to say. They were the ones that stormed the Capitol last time.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into January 6th because that'll go to a pit. But I want to give Nasir. Hang on. I want to give
one thing, Warren, and I got to go.
Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to say that, it's, and I don't want to get into politics too much, but you have the white collar worker that controls the narrative and they push the narrative along. So like, we were talking about, keep everyone, fat and drugged up and happy and on their escapism of their video games or whatever it is. And look to Western Europe. They do that all the time. That's what they do. They take 2-week vacations and whatnot. When the civil war that Crow is talking about comes, what will happen is it won't be a civil war like you think. It will be the people who farm. It will be the truckers, like in Canada, who stop infrastructure, who stop the food, who stop the diesel, and that will be the protest or the war that you're referring to, because that will show the white collar worker, the people in charge of the narrative, that they're full of narratives. But at the end of the day, you need food, you need energy, and you need your Maslow hierarchy of needs to survive. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
On that note, that will be a lot of those jobs in the next 10 to 15 years will be taken over by AI and robotics.
Crow, I'm
and
sorry.
then in charge will shut it the fuck down.
All right, I'm sorry, Crow, but people have their hands raised, and I want to get. And Nasir's been waiting for a while. Nasir, go ahead.
Thank you very much, good friend. Also, but what attracted me to this conversation was what you said, Mr. Warren, that the whole world is obese and they are full of food and they have eaten. Well, my name is Nasir and I'm from Nigeria, Abuja to be precise, which is the Federal Capital Territory. And I would like to tell you that reality only exists in the US. A lot of people here are hungry. They can't even go to the farms because of the insecurity. And I am afraid that might trickle down to your own place, because most of the people at the US don't farm, don't know how to make their own food. And I think that's where you guys are going to be hit the most. That's it. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. But if I can actually ask you like a loosely related topic or maybe completely unrelated topic, there's this, you're still here. So there's a topic that I mentioned earlier. When I look at where I think we're headed and where I think we may be facing some sort of like global economic collapse, one of the challenges is not overpopulation, but population collapse. And Nigeria is a counterexample to what we're experiencing in a lot of the wealthy world, where we're having fewer children and we're facing a future, and you're seeing it in Japan and South Korea and China already, that the populations are falling, and that can lead to severe economic problems. Nigeria is one of the few places in the world that's actually got a high birth rate.
Yes.
Although, and I think there's theories that Nigeria will actually have a larger population than China by 2100, although the birth rate is declining in Nigeria. What's your sense? Because we tend to focus on our world. We tend to focus on, the wealthy, Western world, and, Americans in particular. The only place we
Yes.
know about is America. What are you seeing in Nigeria? How is all this stuff playing out there?
Well, to be honest, I say if we make better use of the resources we have, take for instance, I am a lithium miner, and I know where lithium is going to be in the next few years. And yes, and we have a lot of gold, tantalite, you name it, all the good stuff, we have it. But for some reason, I can't even refine my products because I don't have a refinery. If I had that, I could manufacture things, and the population will keep growing because I, as a man, I have a right to marry 4 wives. So if I have call just came in, if I have 4 wives and I have 8 kids with each and every one of them, that means I have 32 kids. The population will still go up, and I have enough land to feed them. I have enough resources to take care of them. So I feel we would be fine, to be honest. Can you hear me? Sorry, I'll call interrupted.
Yes, I can hear you. But let Dr.
Davinsky.
Dr. Davinsky go.
Okay, I want to touch on a few things with population. So population, recently India became the most populated nation on earth, and a lot of Indians celebrated this. But for me, this was a sign of regression. So as a more educated and more wealthier population or a state gets, the less children they tend to have on average. So a population decline is actually it seems counterintuitive, but it's actually a sign of progress for a nation. And populations naturally, they rise and they fall, and they reach an equilibrium. This continual population growth is just unsustainable for a nation. Of course, you have more spenders, you have more buyers, you have more workers in a nation if you have more people. That's why there's a big push for immigration into the Western world to increase the population. But this isn't a good metric. So GDP overall isn't a good metric to judge the economic stability of a nation. What's far more stronger as a metric would be GDP per capita. So you can compare India, which has one of the largest GDPs in the world, compared to Switzerland, which has a relatively small GDP. But you can see the lifestyle, the human development index, the progress of these nations a day and night. I'd much rather live in Switzerland with a much smaller GDP, but a much higher GDP per capita. So that's one comment I'd make about. And also with automation coming, we won't need as large a population. As for Africa is obviously the most resource-rich continent on Earth. And I think an issue they have there is that because there's so many small nations, they're all competing.
Hang on, I'm gonna stop you there. I want to confront you on population collapse.
Mm-hmm.
If birth rates go below 2, if the average woman has fewer than 2 children, and that continues, humanity goes extinct. You can say it's not a problem, but I mean, if you just look at it, you say birth rates have fallen below 2 in a lot of places, and in some places below 1. Humanity, the only way humanity doesn't go extinct is if it changes and the birth rates swing back to higher.
Yeah.
And what we've seen so far is birth rates are continually declining, and we don't fully understand why birth rates are declining. At least we don't think, we have different arguments about as to why, but people implement policy solutions and it doesn't work. So when you say population collapse isn't a problem, I'm saying, well, how do you avoid the extinction problem? That is a simple math. If the average woman has fewer than 2 children, you follow enough generations, we go extinct.
Well, I think it will reach a equilibrium. So I think there will be a swing back. But even if it's less than growth or
wait. We're going to reach an equilibrium. How? I mean, the birth rates are declining. Something has to cause the birth rates to come back up. I'm picking on you.
Well, if it
personally. I'm picking on you
if
because
it drops
hang
to
on.
a point and then like people start to have children again, I don't think it's going to get to the point where there's extinction. So if you take 10 people and only
Well, why not?
and even four of those people.
Penis.
So if you have 10 people and 4 of those people want to have children, that's less than reproduction. That's more than replacement rate. But there's still 4 people. So there's an equilibrium there. It reaches a floor.
It only reaches the floor if people start having more than 2 kids. And people, I'm picking on you just because you advanced the theory, and I'm not trying to be angry at you, but I think that this mindset that the collapse problem will just go away, and people will just start having more kids. We don't have any evidence of any society where the population where the birth rate fell, that it bounced back.
Yes,
By
you
the
do.
way,
You have Hungary, so there are incentives. There's government incentives to increase populations. You can give.
Wait. Is the birth rate in Hungary over 2?
Yes, it is. It's increased over 2. So it's gone from a decline to. That's what I'm saying. Populations naturally they rise and they fall, and they do reach an equilibrium.
Hold on. I follow this topic a lot. Hungary was just discussed in Jordan Peterson's interview with Stephen J. Shaw. I encourage people to look up Stephen J. Shaw. He has his documentary is called Birth Gap. He was interviewed on the Modern Wisdom podcast, which I actually thought was better than the interview with Jordan Peterson. But he was just interviewed by Jordan Peterson a few days ago, and they talked about Hungary. And what he said just conflicts with what you said. But anyway, you and I have gone on this for a while. I want to give other people a chance. So Nasir, go ahead again.
I think, to be honest, the world population needs to go up because as humans, one of the things I've noticed here that hinders population growth is this modern change of sexuality, because men don't have enough time to spend with their women. And it's really causing a big family problem, The man and the woman, for some reason, in this time and age, are in a big problem. It's either they are fighting over who should be submissive or whatever these new languages they come up with. Because I grew up in a very traditional setting and I know what it was. Nobody was discriminated against. Our women are queens. But this day and age, there is always this fight between the man and the woman. And I think that's where the biggest problem is. And it goes down to imprinting, puberty and how we grow up and start having sex. Sorry to use that language, but there's this, nobody is really thinking of having a kid, They're all about just having sex for fun. And it's not it for me, to be honest.
So is that what you're seeing in Nigeria, or is that what you're seeing elsewhere?
That's what I see around. Like I said, I'm only talking about my reality, That's what I'm seeing in Nigeria.
Okay, I want to give DMF a chance. He raised his hand before. And DMF, just so you know, your account looks like a potential troll account, so I'm watching you closely, but go ahead.
No troll here, man. But I don't think you have noticed that the banking system has been already damaged for a long, long time. About a natality rate of every country, it's because of unfortunately, the mRNA vaccine that has reduced the reproductivity of each person. The population is going to reduce, even if we don't want to.
Let me just pause you for a second.
Sorry.
So I started this space a while ago saying I think that the banking system has always been fundamentally flawed, and I think it got worse about 100 years. It started getting worse about 100 years ago. And as far as birth rates started declining long before COVID. And if you follow Stephen J. Shaw, it's StephenJShaw on Twitter, and look up the Modern Wisdom podcast. He was on there in the last month, and he was on Jordan Peterson just a few days ago. The birth rate fall happened. I mean, I do think we are seeing an acceleration in decline of the birth rate as a result of COVID. I think
a catalyst, yes.
But it was already below replacement rate in many countries before. So, but go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
people are, I mean, researchers are still looking for what is the fundamental death rate of after the second boost. There's still a big amount of people that are still at as a test.
I don't want to get into mRNA vaccines and COVID and all that, because that just takes us down a massive rabbit hole. So let me give someone else a chance. Crow, go ahead. I've held you off for a while. Go ahead, Crow.
I was going to ask if in Nigeria the president defended its population, denied the vaccines to enter the country, just like the other 4 countries in Africa, where the presidents
No,
like
no,
in
our
Tanzania,
president didn't do that,
was
sir.
died suddenly, you know, because of not letting the vaccinations program get into its country. Investigated that too.
Mr. DMF, we had vaccines. The people that wanted to use them used them. In fact, I have someone on my street that came up with a cure for COVID. So we just took the vaccines and let people that wanted to use it. We had lockdowns. We took all the precautionary measures. Please do your research. And I'm living here in Nigeria, so these are live
I was
facts.
asking
So please
you.
go.
I was asking you how was it in your
All right,
country?
but I'm very critical of what we did in COVID and of mRNA vaccines, but I don't want to get into that here. So, Crow, go ahead.
We're talking directly about
So,
natality rates, right?
homie, chill. Okay, so, I think that the birth rate. So I'm into some pretty high tech stuff. Most people aren't even really aware of, like brain computer interfaces and virtual humans and stuff like that. And when people get the option to upload on their deathbed, get the option to upload their mind and live forever, they're going to take that opportunity just to leave a copy there for their family. Regardless, people are going to be using the technology as an entertainment tool, smart glasses, and controlling that with their brains. And then it's just going to be to the point to where uploading is going to be more a better funeral plan than a funeral. And then people are going to have AI kids and AI family, and more people are going to go for that. And there will be a group of people that will be looked at like Amish.
Hey,
Eventually,
really
the human
quick.
race will only be something you see in a zoo. This is something in the next 150 years. But I agree that about 100 years ago, I forget the president.
All right, I just wanted to say I think Crow is going off off the deep end to some extent, although I agree with some of what he said. But there's an Amazon show, I think it's called Upload, and it's a really poorly written show, but the principle is that people, when they're on their death, consciousness to the cloud, and it's hilariously dumb, but it's fun. Davinsky, go ahead. Dr. Davinsky?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
So in Hungary, the fertility rate has increased more than anywhere in Europe, raising from 1.25 children per woman to 1.59 in 2021. The Hungarian government aims to reach a ratio of 2.1 by 2030. So you can increase birth rates, fertility rates in a nation with incentives. But my main point is that a declining fertility rate is actually a sign of progress. If you look at the top most fertile nations on Earth, they're third world nations. I mean, there's tons of studies, meta-analysis, which goes over this, that the more educated the population, the more wealthier population, the fewer children they have. And with automation, I don't think it's ever going to the point of extinction. There's always going to be people that want children. We may have a declining population, but eventually I think it will reach an equilibrium. That's what I would say.
All right. So your homework assignment is to watch Birth Gap or listen to the podcast. I think the best one is the Modern Wisdom podcast. Chris Williamson interviewed Stephen J. Shaw. It's in the last month. Your homework assignment is to listen to that conversation or watch that conversation. Maybe watch the one with Jordan Peterson. Maybe watch, I think only the first part of his documentary is free. But watch that and get an understanding of it. I think that I'm going to disagree with you, but I don't think we want to dive deeper into that.
Let me just ask you one question. Like even 1% of people want to have children, right? That means that we're never going to go extinct because there's 1% of the people. Like that would be a distribution over the population. So there'd always be people replacing, even if the vast majority of people don't want to have kids, there's still going to be a small minority that want kids regardless.
Okay. So let's go with that. So if the population is currently, let's say we peak at 10 billion, and then the birth rate falls to 1, right? The average woman has 1 child. So the population falls to 5 billion, and then it falls to 2 point, and let's say it's fixed at 1. It doesn't go up, it doesn't go down. But 1%, some percentage of people are going to have children, right? So it's not 0, it's 1. So you go from 10 billion to 5 billion to 2.5 billion to 1.25 billion, and you just keep following this down, and you get to the point where the population is small enough that you can't sustain a modern economy anymore. And maybe Crow is correct that the AI will take over everything and it won't matter anymore, and consciousness will just move into artificial general intelligence and artificial super intelligence, and we will be irrelevant. But I'm not really looking forward to
I don't
that.
think that.
But let me give Nas.
I think that
Hang on.
small nations with
I
small
don't. I just don't want to dive down this rabbit hole that much. I want to give other people a chance to speak, and we can go on about that forever. But I've given you your homework assignment. You can follow it or not. Modern
Mr. Warren, can I
podcast.
give him something before you go?
Go ahead, Nasir.
He's speaking about third world countries. Now, let me tell you the main reason why we haven't utilized our population. It's because of corruption and greed. If not, if you see what Nigerians are capable of, you will be shocked. The only reason why you see them online scamming people is because of that level of hunger, which has deteriorated their moral compass. Now, I haven't felt that. That's why I have a different mindset in terms of how things should be. But to be honest, if you come to Nigeria and you train 100,000 of them, you would be shocked what you would see, Mr. Honest. And I'm being honest.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. What I was going to touch on before is that I think that the reason that a lot of African nations haven't progressed as much as they could is because you're all competing against, so you are the most resource-rich continent on Earth, but because there's so many small nations competing in the same market for selling these minerals, there needs to kind of standardization in price across the continent, and that way you're not undercutting. It's kind of like if you have the Aral Sea is a good case study. So the Aral Sea is surrounded by several nations, and it's a similar analogy as if you have a milkshake and you drink that milkshake to yourself, you're going to drink that a lot slower compared to if you're sharing that milk with 3 other people with straws, because you're both competing against each other. So that's what I think is competition. There needs to be a standardization, and then you'd see a lot more progress.
I think we need manufacturing capability because my ideas are going to differ from the next person's own. So that's when that type of competition would come in. And to be honest, I'm not scared of competition. I know what I'm capable of. So if my brother also has a chance to show himself and I have a chance to show myself, trust me, you'd be amazed.
Crow, go ahead.
So I know you feel like I went off the deep end, but that's actually my field of research. It's way closer than you think.
I like your deep end. I just don't like it for this space.
Well, it was relevant at the time, is my point. The ocean decline is gonna in the next 100 to 50 years, it's gonna be a completely different scenario, but that's gonna be out of most people's lifespans for now. So whatever. But I agree with what you were saying about the banks. I think it was, which president was it? When the gold went when money went off the gold standard. Nixon. I think that was the spark of the problem.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the creation of the Federal Reserve, but I think it's like there's steps along the path. So we've been having this conversation about population and other topics, and the purpose of this space was we just had this mini banking crisis in the United States, which is hopefully over. But we have an ongoing series of crises over decades. And I think the banking system is fundamentally flawed, and we're heading to trouble. But hang on, I want to give Mortensen a chance. I think we were talking earlier on DMs or something, and Mortensen wanted to speak. Go ahead, Mortensen.
Hey, everybody. Thank you. I have a point that I was brought up in one of the tweets. Can you hear me okay, guys?
Yes.
So this person was saying, well, why should I have all my money in one account? I mean, why should I put my money in different accounts and not just in one account for the FDIC insured of 250? And I said, well, you should take your $3 million and $10 million and put in different accounts, because now you're diversifying banks and you're reducing the risk for the rest of us. Because we are actually insuring your money through our tax bill. So you should diversify your $10 million across accounts. And you also bring more business to different accounts, to different businesses, to different banks. So yes, you should not only be cautious about your $10 million in one account, you should do it for good reasons, including diversifying to reduce the risk for all of us. That's my point.
Thank you. Jason, a chance. Jason, you've been pretty vocal about the crisis on Twitter. What are your thoughts on whether there's a fundamental problem? Is the banking system fundamentally broken, or what else do you want to talk about? Jason, are you there?
I think Jason says he's a listener. I don't think he's a speaker yet.
Well, Jason, you show as a speaker on mine, but I don't know what you show on yours. So you might want to quit and come back. Literally quit the app or reboot and come back, because I can see you as a speaker, but apparently you can't speak. No one
It
can hear
says
you if you are
listener with
speaking.
my.
We all see him as listening.
I think this is just, in the age of all this great software, it's apparently not working that well. So, Dr. Davinsky, did you have something you wanted to say?
Not necessarily. I mean, we've moved on from that topic. But I won't reiterate. Yeah.
All right, so let me let Wes go. Wes, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Warren. I've been listening for about a half hour, I think, but I missed some of what Crow might have said at the beginning. And I don't understand the grievance. Crow was saying something along the lines of people that are homeless and some other categories of people are going to rise up and potentially have a civil war. And it sounded like they're demanding other people's money be handed to them. And, look, there's a lot of people that need help. But there's also a huge grievance industry where people are being told that other folks are out to get you. So I'm curious what Crow's specific grievance is that he's predicting a civil war.
Well, the current issue, this isn't even a future thing. The current issue with the homeless population and a lot of the downtrodden in the country is that they can try their hardest, and then the more they ask for help to do their best and try to get jobs and try to do the things they're supposed to do, the farther they get pushed down.
Well, how so? I mean, how is that any different than anybody else trying to get a job?
Because other people, that if I have a house or I have some type of resources to offer, I'll get the help.
Why? Like why?
Just by home, by looking clean, get someone the help they need. As we're just by looking like less than someone or being stuck living in a tent or something, it makes it to where they're instantly cut off from any help that they would require to just survive.
Yeah, I've got with I think everything I've heard you say, and I'm not trying to attack you, by the way. You seem very intelligent. We just have different views, perhaps. But everything you seems to have a dependency. I must get something from someone else in order to be successful. The whole thing. And it's like, you don't need handouts. When we start telling people that they can do it on their own.
That's the issue. There are people out here who do need handouts. Disabled people, homeless on the street that do need handouts.
Well, let me just step in for a second. So, you've mentioned the homeless before, and I think it was a really good question from Wes about the homeless. So, I don't know all of the homeless problem. I did represent a homeless guy as his attorney for a while, and I would say that the large-scale problem in the homeless community that I was able to see through his lens and what I saw in that world is there's a lot of mental health issues in the homeless community. He had the resources. If he wanted to, he could have had a place. He had a pile of cash for him. He literally was spending something like hundreds of dollars a month, maybe it was $1,000 a month, maintaining 2 storage units where he just had piles of junk. He was a hoarder. He was a homeless hoarder. Now, that doesn't mean all homeless people are hoarders, right? But a large share of the homeless population are homeless because they are either choosing to be homeless consciously or they have mental health issues. You know, you can depend on your perspective. Like, he would deny he had a mental health issue. He was fine. He was perfectly happy with his life the way it was. He was complaining that he was, you know, he had this idea he was going to start a nonprofit or he was going to start a business and he couldn't get things that he wanted done. But fundamentally, he wasn't functional enough to accomplish anything meaningful other than keep himself going and keep his stuff stored. And that's what he did with his life. And I'm not, to my knowledge, people who are homeless in America are largely people who are either choosing to be homeless or have mental health issues that prevent them from succeeding. That's my
There
take
are
on
also
it.
disabilities, like physical disabilities as well. And yeah, it is
No,
majority. It is majority,
no,
right? But there
no.
are those that don't want to be in that position.
There's lots of people with physical disabilities who are able to be successful in the world. You
Like
know,
I'm gonna keep it real. I'm living in a tent right now. I could work just fine if I could find a way to a place to get the job. If I had a way around, I'd be fine.
okay, so Crow just exposed himself, initially saying he was an AI researcher and he was working on all this stuff, and now apparently he's homeless and not able to get a job, or he's living in a tent and not able to get a job. So I suspected troll, but he was really good at it. He was really good at telling that story, and then he just exposed the hole. So I'm not buying the story anymore.
Yeah,
I
me
thought
neither.
I thought it was interesting. I thought he made some good points, but I was suspicious, and he just opened the hole. It's one of the fun things about having a space like this. No, Crow, you're not coming back up. I'm satisfied that you've exposed the hole. Um, you're no longer an AI researcher who's pushing us towards the great reset. You're a guy living in a tent telling a story, and that's not. There's no space for that here. I'm sorry, Dr. Davinsky, go ahead.
So what I would say is a bit of an anomaly with America compared to other Western first world nations is these social. So I'm a social democrat. I think that the best systems are capitalist with a social fabric that has fair, global, universal healthcare and such in there. So like people fall, but they fall to a point and then they're stopped from falling. That doesn't seem to be the case in America. So that's what I is the issue when it comes to America is like housing and medical. And I think that Trump's kind of hit on it with his base. If you look at Trump's base, they're mostly rural Americans, like his most patriotic, fundamentalist base. They would actually benefit the most from policies like Bernie Sanders was proposing, like to deal with the opium crisis, to deal with dental, to deal with all of these issues that these people that live in trailers would benefit from the most. But I think that any socialist policy, the next step is full-blown communism and gulags. Like the Red Scare in America is just totally irrational.
All right, I'm just going to cut you off because I don't want to have a conversation about Donald Trump, and I will just tell you I know an awful lot of Donald Trump supporters who are wealthy and successful and live in suburban or urban areas. I think we've gone long enough, and I think we've gone way off the original topic, which was whether the banking system is broken. So I'm going to close the space shortly, but I just want to lay out, like, my view is that, and what I think we need to think about is the banking system we have is something that evolved over at least 100, maybe a couple hundred years, if not longer. And I think that the technological change that we've experienced, in particular cryptocurrencies and the internet and the opportunity for, like, let's say, crowd lending as an alternative. Like, if we look at the basic functions that banking serves in our economy, I think we could probably move on to a different technological solution that would be better than what we have today. And I think we have a crisis like just what just happened. We've had crises in the past, and I don't think people appreciate when we keep seeing changes which involve greater and greater concentration and centralization of power in the hands of the few at the top in the government and the Federal Reserve and the biggest banks and so on. And I think this doesn't end well, the path that we're on. And I don't know that there's a way out of this path. I think, one of the things that government has interfered with the growth of cryptocurrencies, because cryptocurrencies are a threat to the power of those who control the funny green paper. And they've, to some extent, hindered the opportunity for individuals to choose how to invest their money by, let's say, restricting investment in venture capital to only those people who are, what do you call it, accredited investors or whatever, qualified investors. And they, just a real example, like I was thinking about doing a round to raise money for one of my startups, and the regulatory setup for crowdfunding is you have to pay one of these entities that are approved, and it ends up costing 10% of what you raise, just because you have to hire. You can't just DIY crowdfunding. I was going to DIY my crowdfunding, and you can't do that. And we end up with these regulatory structures that are supposedly protecting us from all these bad investments, and what they end up doing is they protect us from innovation and growth. So I think we have a potentially better world ahead if we can get there. I agree with Audrey. I think Audrey left, but I agree with Audrey that we're probably not going to get there. And then I think you have to ask the question, if the banking system is fundamentally broken and we can't come up with an alternative, is this going to take us down a path to some kind of massive economic collapse? When you look at the national debt, we look at all kinds of debt problems, student loan debt and so on and so forth, and auto loans, whether, there's all kinds of mispriced assets in our economy today. The unfunded liabilities and government printing money, you look at all these things together and you say, are we building an increasingly fragile system that, at some point, like we can solve short-term problems, but can things blow up? So that's just some thoughts. I want to give the speakers a chance. If any of you have something, go ahead. Otherwise, I think we can wrap up the space. Go ahead, Nasir.
Yeah, before you go, your man here sent me a DM. He said he lives in a tent, but he's just there for fun. He's not homeless. So jokes anyway, Mr. Warren.
No, he said he couldn't get work. He went beyond just living in a tent to saying he couldn't get work after telling us he was an AI researcher who was working on getting the Great Reset happening.
And I have been attending a lot of his spaces. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Warren, for pointing that out. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for giving me a chance to speak. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Mortensen?
Yeah, so the future of banking, the big change I see has happened is that by going in and say we're going to insure every single dollar, which is pretty much impossible because the collective is like $22 trillion of deposits in America. But the step change is now that if banks becomes a utility, where there is no risk and banks cannot have a risk profile that really holds them accountable, we change the banking system completely to a utility with regulations, and then I don't see stock prices anymore. I don't see earnings. A lot of things I don't see anymore. That's the aspect I find interesting.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody. Was there anything else you wanted to say, Mortensen?
No, I'm good. Thank you so much for the space. It was good space today. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks everyone for participating, and I'm probably going to post this on YouTube on the Daily Lie, my non-censorship channel, and wherever else. So thanks, and this space was recorded so people can listen to it again later. Thanks, everybody.